On the morning of January 28, 2025, an intersection in the city of Yashio, just northeast of Tokyo, opened up. Not gradually, in about 4 seconds. A delivery truck turning left dropped into a hole roughly 5 meters wide, and over the following days, that hole kept growing until it was 40 meters across and 15 meters deep. The cause wasn't an earthquake, it was a sewer pipe, a 4.5-meter wide concrete drainage line buried under the road since the early 1980s had quietly corroded at a bend until it failed. And here's the detail that almost nobody outside Japan noticed. Because there was no backup line, authorities asked around 1.2 million residents in the surrounding area to stop using the sewer system, not to conserve water, to stop flushing. 1,200,000 people in one of the most advanced sanitation networks on Earth were told that the invisible machine under their streets had broken and they needed to stop feeding it. Meanwhile, about 30 kilometers away in central Tokyo, a company had already spent years building something designed around a very different assumption, that the pipe might not be there at all. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a toilet can work without a sewer connection, why that's a genuinely difficult engineering problem, and why the thing that might actually become obsolete isn't the toilet in your bathroom at all. Think about how little you know about the object you use several times a day, every day, for your entire life. You know the handle, you know the seat, you know the sound, and that's essentially it. Everything past the drain is a black box. The toilet is arguably the most successful piece of household engineering ever deployed, and the reason is that it does something extraordinary while asking almost nothing of you. You press a lever, and a public health problem that killed people at scale for most of human history is removed from your house instantly and silently. But the design underneath that handle is very old. The S-shaped bend that holds a small plug of standing water in the pipe, the piece that stops sewer gas from coming back up into the room, was patented in the 1770s by the Scottish watchmaker Alexander Cumming. That water seal is still the core of every flush toilet on the planet today. Manufacturers have refined the porcelain, cut the flush volume, added heated seats and bidet functions, and in Japan they've done that better than almost anyone, but the fundamental logic hasn't changed in about 250 years. Use clean water to carry waste away, and let gravity and a network of buried pipes take it somewhere else. And that logic is expensive in a way most people never calculate. According to survey work by the Bureau of Waterworks of the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, toilet flushing accounts for roughly 22% of average household water use in Tokyo, second only to bathing. That's drinking quality water. Water that was drawn from a river or reservoir, filtered, disinfected, tested against dozens of regulated parameters, pumped through kilometers of pressurized pipe, and delivered to your home at a standard safe enough to drink. And then you use about a fifth of it to move waste 20 centimeters into a pipe. Nobody designed it that way because it was elegant. It was designed that way because water was the cheapest available carrier, and once cities committed to that decision in the 19th and 20th centuries, everything else got built on top of it. Here's the part that turns this from a curiosity into an engineering problem. That buried network doesn't last forever, and Japan is now the country finding that out most publicly. Most of Japan's major public infrastructure was built during the rapid growth decades of the 1960s and 1970s. Which means an enormous share of the pipe under Japanese cities is now hitting the end of its designed service life at roughly the same time. After the Yashio collapse, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism asked local governments to inspect around 5,332 kilometers of large sewer pipe, specifically lines 2 meters or more in diameter that had been in service 30 years or longer. The results, reported in 2026, were not reassuring. Roughly 200 kilometers across 46 of Japan's 47 prefectures were classified as needing action within a year. Another 547 kilometers were placed in a category requiring full repairs within 5 years. And the Land Ministry has reported more than 10,000 road cave-ins in a single fiscal year, many of them sewer-related, though the overwhelming majority are small. So what's actually eating the pipes? This is worth understanding because it explains why the problem gets worse rather than better. Inside a large sewer, waste sits and moves slowly, and bacteria in that environment break down sulfur compounds and release hydrogen sulfide gas. That gas rises into the airspace at the top of the pipe. On the damp concrete surface above the waterline, a different group of bacteria goes to work on that gas and converts it into sulfuric acid. The acid attacks the cement binding the concrete together. Slowly, over decades, the crown of the pipe thins from the inside, in a place nobody can see, on a surface no water is flowing over. In Yashio, reporting indicates the corrosion had concentrated at a bend where flow conditions change and turbulence is highest. The pipe held until it didn't. And the specific danger of this failure mode is that a sewer is not just a pipe, it's a void. When it ruptures, the soil around it starts washing away into the break, and the road above loses its support before anyone at street level has any warning at all. Then there's the second failure mode, and Japan learned this one on New Year's Day of 2024. When the Noto Peninsula earthquake struck, water and sewer service in parts of the peninsula went down for weeks, not hours, weeks. And here's what people discovered in the evacuation centers. Bottled drinking water is relatively easy to truck in. Domestic water is not. The Tokyo company I mentioned at the start has pointed out in its own disaster reporting that the volume of water a person needs for washing, laundry, and toilet flushing is more than 100 times what they need for drinking. You cannot solve that with pallets of bottles. And a flush toilet with no water pressure and no functioning drain isn't a degraded toilet, it's furniture. Which brings us to the actual question a small group of Japanese engineers started asking. Not, how do we build a better toilet? How do we build a toilet that doesn't need the pipe? Woda Corp is a Tokyo company founded in 2014 by students from the University of Tokyo, headquartered in Nihonbashi. Their core technology isn't a toilet at all, it's a control system. The idea is this: a municipal water treatment plant and a municipal sewage treatment plant both work, and the chemistry and biology involved are well understood. But they're enormous, and they require trained human operators making constant judgment calls about filtration, pressure, and disinfection based on what's actually in the water that day. Woda's proposition is that if you replace the operator with sensors and algorithms, you can shrink that entire process down to something the size of a large appliance and put it inside a house. Their first products proved the control system worked in the hardest possible environment. Wash is a hand-washing stand built into a drum-shaped housing that needs a power outlet and nothing else, no plumbing. It recycles over 98% of its water, which the company says allows roughly 500 hand washings from 20 liters. Wada Box is the shower version, weighing around 80 kilograms with a footprint of about a quarter of a cubic meter, and it can support roughly 100 people showering one after another using about 100 liters of water. To put that in perspective, the Japanese government has noted that 100 people showering normally would consume something closer to 5,000 liters. And these are not concept renders. After the Noto earthquake, Wada deployed roughly 100 Wada Box units and 200 wash stands, covering by the company's account about 89% of evacuation centers hit by long-term water outages, along with dozens of hospitals and care facilities. But showers and sinks are the easy half of the problem. Gray water from a shower is dirty. Toilet wastewater is a different category entirely, and this is where the engineering gets genuinely hard. The product Wada published in July 2025, called the Wada Unit, handles both, and it does it by refusing to mix them. The system splits the house into two separate loops. Wastewater from showers, kitchen sinks, and washing machines goes into one unit. Toilet wastewater is collected through its own dedicated pipe and sent to a completely separate toilet water regeneration unit. That separation matters because the two streams have very different loads, and combining them would force the whole system to treat everything to the hardest standard. Here's what physically happens inside. First, biological treatment. Microorganisms are held inside the unit and fed on the organic matter in the wastewater, breaking it down the same way they would in a municipal treatment plant, just in a far smaller volume. Then the water passes through membrane filtration, where the pore size is small enough to physically block particles and microbes that survive the biological stage. Then disinfection, using ultraviolet light and chlorine, which handles what the membranes let through. For the higher grade output, there's an additional reverse osmosis stage where the water is forced under pressure through a membrane so fine that dissolved salts and remaining contaminants are left behind on one side. The output is then routed back into the house. Regenerated water from the domestic loop goes to the shower, the kitchen, and the washing machine. The toilet loop's output goes back to the toilet through a dedicated pipe and flushes it again. And that's the shift. The toilet no longer needs a supply of drinking water coming in, and it no longer needs a sewer taking waste out. It needs a loop. It's worth pausing on why the loop is harder than it sounds. In a municipal system, dilution does an enormous amount of invisible work. Your waste enters a river of other people's water and arrives at the plant already thinned out. And if one household does something unusual, the volume absorbs it. A single house loop has none of that buffer. The same water passes through the same treatment stages again and again, which means anything the process fails to remove doesn't get flushed away downstream. It accumulates. That's why the sensor layer isn't a convenience feature. It's the thing standing between a working system and a slowly degrading one. And it's why the machine has to be able to detect a change in the water and respond to it before a person would ever notice something was wrong. The reason this is possible now and wasn't 20 years ago is the control layer, not the filters. Membranes, UV, and biological treatment are decades-old technologies. What's new is that the unit continuously monitors water quality and water pressure with onboard sensors and automatically adjusts how it's operating in response, without a technician. WOA calls this autonomous water treatment control, and it's the part that makes the difference between a laboratory setup and something that can sit outside a house. The company states the water it supplies complies with WHO drinking water quality guidelines, and separately that it meets the 51 parameters of Japan's Waterworks Act drinking water standard. Read that carefully, though, because the company's own documentation immediately adds that the water is nonetheless not recommended for drinking, and a dedicated drinking water unit is listed as still under development. That gap between meeting a standard and being certified for a use is a real distinction, and it's the kind of detail that usually gets deleted when a story like this travels. Quick question while we're here. If a system like this were installed at your house and it was genuinely proven to work, would you actually be comfortable with a toilet flushed by water that came from your own toilet the day before? Or is that a psychological line you wouldn't cross regardless of the test results? I'm honestly curious how that splits, so tell me in the comments. And if you like technology explained with the limitations left in rather than edited out, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep doing it. Now let's be precise about where this actually stands, because the honest version is more interesting than the hyped one. The WOTA unit is not a finished mass market product. WOTA's own specification page states plainly that the unit is currently under development for mass production, with support from NITO, Japan's National Research and Development Agency for Energy and Industrial Technology, and that specifications and performance are subject to change as development continues. It has been tested at multiple sites in Japan and abroad since 2023, and it's supplying water to homes in Antigua and Barbuda, a Caribbean country dealing with chronic water shortage. But tested and deployed in trials is not the same as available at your local building supplier. The published constraints are worth taking seriously. The domestic unit measures roughly 1.68 meters wide and 1.4 meters tall and weighs about 170 kilograms dry. So this is equipment that needs a dedicated outdoor space, not a cupboard. Its treatment capacity is listed at roughly 438 to 720 liters per day, which is a real ceiling for a household. Because treatment takes time, the amount of water available at any single moment is limited, meaning the system cannot behave like mains pressure on demand. The loop is not perfectly closed either. Water lost to evaporation and the pre-treated byproduct separated out during reverse osmosis has to be replenished from a rainwater tank, and that byproduct stream is discharged rather than reused. The system requires continuous electricity, which is a meaningful caveat for a product partly justified by disaster resilience. It requires routine maintenance, including filter replacement. Users are explicitly warned not to pour chemicals or food waste down the drain, because that can overload the microorganisms or the filters, which means the machine has behavioral requirements a sewer never had. And in some cases, the company notes, the toilet fixtures themselves may need to be modified. There's a regulatory layer too. Water used for flushing has to comply with the Land Ministry's standards for reuse of treated wastewater, and that's before you get to local building codes, which in most countries were written on the assumption that a house connects to a sewer or a septic tank. And there's the cost question, which is the one nobody can answer yet, because a product still in pre-mass production doesn't have a stable price. Its economic case is strongest exactly where the alternative is worst: remote settlements, mountainous villages, and islands where extending or replacing conventional pipe is ruinously expensive for a shrinking municipality. That's precisely why Wada launched a 10 billion yen fund in July 2025, aimed at helping Japanese local governments plan and finance decentralized systems rather than trying to sell units household by household in central Tokyo. So the honest framing is this: nothing here makes the toilet bowl obsolete. The porcelain stays, the seat stays, the S-bend Alexander Cumming patented in the 1770s stays. What's being challenged is the assumption underneath it that a toilet must be one endpoint of a vast, expensive, buried municipal network that has to be maintained forever by a workforce that, in Japan's case, has been shrinking for decades. In 1997, there were around 47,000 workers in Japan's wastewater treatment industry. By 2021, that figure had fallen to roughly 26,900, at exactly the moment the pipes started aging out. Japan approved a 5-year infrastructure resilience plan in 2026 worth over 20 trillion yen, with aging infrastructure as a central focus, and Parliament passed a revision to the sewerage law the same year, requiring operators to disclose the condition of their facilities. Those are the responses of a country that has understood the pipes are a problem. Decentralized recycling is a different response to the same problem. Instead of maintaining the network forever, remove the need for parts of it. And that reframes what the technology actually is. It's not a bathroom gadget, it's a proposal that infrastructure could be a product you install rather than a system you're connected to. The same logic already played out in electricity, where rooftop solar and batteries turned some households into partial participants rather than pure consumers, and in telecoms, where much of the world skipped landline copper entirely and went straight to mobile. Whether water follows that pattern is genuinely unsettled. Water is heavier, dirtier, more regulated, and far less forgiving of failure than electrons or data. A dropped call is an inconvenience. A failure in a sanitation loop is a public health event. That's the reason this is being tested slowly rather than launched loudly, and it's the right reason. So the toilet in your bathroom is going to work the same way tomorrow morning as it did this morning. That part isn't changing soon. But the more interesting question isn't whether engineers can make a toilet that recycles its own water. They've built one, it's been tested, and it's running in real houses. The question is whether they can make it cheap enough, reliable enough, and boring enough that a municipality would choose it over digging a new pipe. Here's what I keep coming back to. For about 150 years, the standard measure of whether a city was modern was how much pipe it had buried under it. That was the achievement. Now Japan is discovering the invoice on that achievement, arriving all at once from thousands of kilometers of concrete quietly dissolving in the dark. And a small group of engineers has responded by asking whether the pipe was ever the point or just the only tool available at the time. Which makes me wonder, what else around you is like that? What other systems in your life were built as the best available solution to a problem in 1890 and have simply never been questioned since because they mostly work and nobody wants to look underneath? Let me know what comes to mind in the comments. And if you want more of these, the ones where the real story is buried under the road rather than announced on a stage, subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.